Well, clearly the first thing to say is our thoughts are with his family and his staff and his friends. And this, I mean, I suspect this must have been a shocking occurrence for those of his staff who were with him when the event happened, and obviously for his family. You can't think of a worse tragedy to happen to a family. Shailesh has said a lot about him, and Shailesh, of course, is absolutely right. But the thing you can say about David is he was an absolutely decent man. The reason Shailesh said everybody loved him in the house was he was the sort of person who had no side to him. He was completely decent, completely straightforward, very outspoken sometimes. He was a big supporter of Mrs. Thatcher in her day. And I've known him for over 30 years. And he was the sort of person that actually made Parliament work. You hear about the big names, the Borises and the Rishis and so on. But actually, Parliament depends on people like David who serve on the committees, as you said, take part in campaigns. If I was running a campaign, it's pretty much the first telephone call would be to David. But the sort of person that actually makes our Parliament and our democracy work, and which is why it's such a terrible, tragic paradox, really, because he killed doing in some ways the most important thing for a member of Parliament, and that is contact with their own constituents, helping them, talking them through problems, putting things right for them, representing them. And of course, he was brilliantly good at that. I mean, when David had a Prime Minister's question, it wouldn't be about this, unlikely to be anyway, about the situation in Syria. It'd be about the situation in his constituency and a particular problem that had come up or a particular issue that needed to be dealt with. And this was true day in, day out. He was always there. Always doing his work, and I say over decades. So I don't know if Shailesh is right about whether him having been the next in line for leader of the House, but he was certainly amongst that group of very senior MPs who everybody listened to. Everybody paid attention to when they spoke, which is not universally true of everybody, but it certainly was true of him. So a good man, a decent man, the sort of person who the Parliament is built upon and depends upon, and therefore a great loss to us all.
Basildon man, wasn't he, David? That was his former constituency before the boundary changes. Basildon man, of course, was that political leitmotif. It was the swing constituency. If the Tories won Basildon, they were going to win the election. And he was one of those, what you'd call bootstrap working class Conservatives from the East End of London, moved out to Essex in search of prosperity and a better life. Quite similar to you, if I may say so, as somebody from a humble background, using the Conservative Party as a way to make your mark in life and to take a role in our public debate. I'm sure that was a lot of the reason you and he actually knew each other quite well and you had an affinity for him.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, but as I say, it's this sort of just basic decency. I don't think he saw politics as a career. I think he saw it as a vocation. He saw it as something that he just did because he loved to serve people, and that shone through. There's literally no side to it. I mean, and this is unusual, when you think in politics, there's lots of scheming and lots of plotting and lots of this, that, and the other. David was never in any of that. He was just a man who would turn up in the chamber, make his point, win his argument, represent his constituents, and as you say, stand up for the sort of working men and women of Britain. I mean, that's why he was a great Thatcher supporter, because it was sort of white van man, as it was known, in probably unfashionably today, but in those days, who brought Thatcher into power. And that was the sort of person that David was seen as symbolising in many ways. That's why, as you say, I mean, he became famous for being that swing MP. When he was in the House, the Tory government was safe. As simple as that, really. But the real terrible nature of this is that he was doing exactly what we think of him as doing, representing his constituents, dealing with them face to face, dealing with the ordinary day-to-day thing that we all do, and he made an art form of. So, yeah, I mean, yes, I did feel an affinity for him for that. He also, like many people in House of Commons, he didn't have an easy life and all sorts of difficulties along the way. But you wouldn't know about any of it, because he wouldn't have talked to you about any of it. It would be things he dealt with, just he dealt with everything else. So a very good man. But I fear to say, and this may not be the time to talk about it, but I fear to say that this is becoming now. I mean, what we've heard from your reporter, 4 different events in a decade or two, is not an uncommon problem now. Unfortunately, attacks on MPs and incidentally, in one case, their assistants is something we now have to worry about quite a lot, because if this is allowed to break that link between ordinary members of parliament and ordinary constituents on a day-to-day basis, week in, week out. I think you said earlier, Friday's a typical constituency day. Yes, it is. It's a time when you come away from parliament, you actually make that contact. Now, if this puts that at risk, I mean, David himself will be outraged at that. He always took that as a very important thing. So that's a really quite serious balance we're going to have to work out in the coming months. We've had Joe Cox, we've had David now, we had Stephen Timms, who was quite seriously injured, I think, from memory. And if I remember correctly, it was Nigel Jones's assistant who I think was killed. So this is not something we can just accept and carry on with. We have to deal with. I mean, Arlene, you'll know from your own service in the province that this issue is one that you can't let come between members of parliament or elected members of the storm for that matter, and your constituents. And you had to deal with it for 40 years, I guess. And we've just got to find a way of getting around it.
David Davis, former cabinet minister, friend of the late Sir David Amess.